This is drawing 3, and drawing flowers can be very challenging, and it takes a few steps to get to this point because there are so many details that are involved in drawing a flower and then, of course, painting it at some later date. Flowers come in all shapes and sizes, and that is exactly what we're going to study, is figuring out what the shapes and sizes are and how to render them. Now you can see here some basic shapes which you should be familiar with. These are forms that we talked about in drawing 1 and in drawing 2. You can see that these forms have been shaded with scientific lighting. All flowers are made up of these basic shapes. You have cylinders, you have cup shapes, you have spheres, you have cones, whether they are vertical like this or inverted in the other direction, and then you have cylinders that are very narrow, but all flowers are made up of these forms. So once you understand that and you understand where the lighting falls on each of these forms, it will make your drawing of a flower that much simpler. So let's take a look at some flowers and see if we can figure out what the basic shapes are for those particular flowers. Since our first assignment is going to be a tulip, we will start with that particular shape. This happens to be a cup-shaped flower. Cup-shaped flowers can be either very deep or very shallow. In the case of this particular tulip, it is a fairly deep cup. If I were to take a marker and draw an ellipse for the opening, and then the base of the cup for the flower, you can see that we have a very simple geometric form. It's once you have this geometric form that you can then break the flower into more of its part. Another simple flower is our daffodil, and this is actually made up of 2 basic forms. You can see from this view here that this is basically a cylinder. Now it flares out at the top, in which case you can actually create an ellipse that fills that frill end of the cylinder. You also have 6 petals. In this case, they are at an angle. In the case here, we hardly see the cylinder at all, but we see 2 ellipses. Almost a sphere in this case, and almost a sphere or a round shape in this case. You will see just the slightest amount of the cylinder. So this shape now looks like this. Now obviously this elliptical shape includes the radial petals that are around the outside of the cylinder. But this is your basic shape. This is your basic shape for this particular angle on the daffodil, and this is the shape for this angle on the daffodil. Let's look at another flower. Here we have a daisy, and again, these are very simple shapes. We have an ellipse shape for the outer rays. And here, this ellipse is very elongated. But if you look at the center flower in this case, you will notice that this is an inverted cup. We don't see the opposite side, or we don't see the inside, but it is in fact a cup. This, again, you can kind of see that it is a cup. Here it's almost an ellipse because of the way that it appears. Notice that the centers on these things are a little off from the center of the ellipse. So in this case, we will have an ellipse that looks like this, another one that does this, a more rounded sphere shape. Your cup shaped center looks like a sphere, and then we will have an elliptical shape here, and here is where our cup shape looks the most obvious. If we look carefully at this Calla Lily, we can see that this happens to be an inverted cone. So we have our opening at the top, and then we have this cone shape that goes to the bottom. So in all cases here, you can see even this one, which has a very tight ellipse at the top, but it's kind of a distorted cone that makes up the overall shape of these flowers. So what do you have then? You have this shape for the one flower. This one where the opening is a little distorted, it's more elliptical, but it's still a cone. This one has a very closed bottom, or top in this case, but still a cone. And then the last one does about the same thing, but again, it is a cone. And then the stems come off, like so. Lastly, we need to deal with spheres, and these are perfect examples of that. All you really need to do in order to draw this, and these are very small flowers, they are probably no more than 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and it will be a matter of drawing texture on the surface of these flowers. A very simple form. So the whole idea here will be just to make sure that when you render these, the lighting is correct. But really, it's a matter of, all right, so here's this shape, here's this shape, here's this shape, and here's this shape. And now it's a matter of doing the fine detail after you've got this initial format recorded. This is an allium, and it is quite a large flower. It ranges in about 4 inches in diameter, and it is a sphere. However, what you need to do is really look at and see, and these are all basically spheres, some of which you see entirely and some of which are overlapping with others. But this will make it much easier for you to draw these if you just follow through and notate. Now, as these go around to the side, they aren't spheres anymore, they are more like ellipses. So as you go towards the edge of the flower, all the little florets now become ellipses rather than spheres. And you can see it pretty clearly as I formulate these simple shapes. For the most part, you have a basic sphere, and then if you start in the middle area where your florets are really spheres, and then as you get closer to the edge, your spheres start to become more elliptical when they get to the outer edges. And those small, narrow, thin ellipses will really help you to define the contour. Even though this is a round flower, it'll help you to define the contour of this particular subject. Now rest assured, you are not going to have to do an allium in this class, but Now this last flower I want to show you is an, oh my gosh, what is it? How do I approach this? Well, there are some things that are basic forms. For instance, the center. We do have a circular form in the center, but after that, we're kind of on our own. So what you want to do is look for edges. For instance, this is an edge here, all right? This is an edge here. This is an edge here, and an edge here, and a long edge here, where things start to align with one another so that you now can start a basic shape for this particular flower. And then there are inner shapes. There's a shape here, and another shape here. Don't look at them as petals, look at them as shapes. Again, you will not have to do a poppy for this class, but I wanted you to be aware of how to go about breaking this down into simplified forms. So we're going to start with our center, which was a sphere, and we'll work off of that. So I'm going to draw, figuring out the distance from here to here is about there, and the angle is about there, and I will draw a guideline for that. The next one I'll do is, which is a long line also, although I know it's a little hard to see, but that's probably going to be there, and the angle is about like that, and I will draw that one. And then we have this line here, which is your next major line, and that's probably going to be somewhere in here, and the angle on that is about like this. All right, so now then we have this crown shape, which is about there, okay? So we're going to draw a little angle in here. This one is quite wide and short, so we're going to draw another angle here. And then here we have another angle here. Now we can put in these smaller shapes. And you have your inner petals. As you can see, you can get your shapes pretty well situated just by using the basic forms.